Hello folks, this is Mark Maritato, military historical artist. Thank you for joining me once again for another video where I'm painting a uniform figure study of a soldier of the Civil War. The unit that I'm working on today is the 155th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry in the Zouave uniform that they had starting in the early part of 1864 through the end of the war. And folks, if you like this video, please hit the like button, consider subscribing to the channel, and also leave a comment in the comments section. This all helps the algorithm so that more people can see the video and I can bring more of this type of content to you. Thank you very much. Here is a brief history of the 155th Pennsylvania Infantry. The 155th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Regiment was a federal infantry regiment that served in the American Civil War in the Army of the Potomac in the Eastern Theater of the conflict. Recruits from the Pittsburgh area and Allegheny County organized at Camp Copeland from September 2nd through the 19th, 1862 into the 155th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Regiment. Edward J. Allen served as its first colonel. Allen would serve as the regiment's colonel until 1863 when he was medically discharged. Afterwards, he would serve in a civilian role to help provision the Union Army in the Shenandoah Valley. After initial training and drilling, the regiment moved via train to Washington, D.C., where it joined the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Division of the Union 5th Corps. From there, it went to Sharpsburg, Maryland after the Battle of Antietam. Their first introduction to battle came on December 13, 1862 at the Battle of Fredericksburg, Virginia, where the color guard suffered heavy casualties in an ill-fated assault. During its first years, the regiment wore the regulation uniform of the Union Army. But in February of 1864, they, along with the 140th New York, received a new uniform inspired by the French Zouave uniform. Another regiment in the brigade, the 146th New York Volunteer Infantry, had already been issued their Zouave uniform in June of 1863. The 146th New York wore a light blue uniform with red and yellow trim. The 140th New York wore a predominantly dark blue uniform with red trim. The 155th Pennsylvania uniform was a French blue, not dark blue, but with a yellow trim that featured a large yellow tombeau, a stylized false pocket on the front left and right breast of the jacket, a matching pair of trousers cut in the Zouave style, although not quite as full as used by other regiments in the American Civil War, and also not quite as full as those used by French Zouave regiments, a red Zouave sash with yellow trim, and a red Zouave fez with yellow trim and blue tassel completed the uniform. Slight variations in the jacket style can be seen in the unit's regimental history entitled Under the Maltese Cross, which was published in 1910. The 155th Pennsylvania, along with the 140th New York, the 146th New York became the, quote, Zouave Brigade in the Army of the Potomac's 5th Corps. The brigade would later grow with the addition of the 5th New York Veteran Volunteer Infantry Regiment. However, the 155th would be transferred to another brigade due to a disagreement between the regiment's colonel and the brigade commander. Colonel and Brevet Brigadier General Alfred L. Pearson, commander of the regiment at the Battle of Lewis's Farm on September 19, 1865, was awarded the Medal of Honor on September 17, 1897, for his actions leading a counterattack which regained lost ground and repulsed the Confederates, driving them back to their original positions. So for this painting, I'm working in acrylic gouache on Strathmore 400 Bristol paper. The paper is a thick, kind of like a board type paper, which artists use for a lot of illustration purposes, and it does a really nice job with working with acrylics and gouache paints. And the reason why I'm using acrylic gouache over regular gouache is because I'd like my originals to be a little bit more permanent than a gouache painting would be. With a gouache painting, the paint can be lifted up by using water anytime in the future, so it's not quite as permanent as an acrylic painting is. With an acrylic painting or with an acrylic paint like what I'm using here, the paint is 100% permanent right when it dries. So once you lay it down, it's down forever, and you can't really bring it back up unless you scrape it off the paper. So that's why I tend to lean more towards using this type of medium. Plus, it's kind of an experiment for me. I've always worked with gouache. I love gouache, but for my original pieces, I wanted something a little bit more permanent. I've done paintings in gouache in the past, and they're fine as long as they don't get wet. They're fine. But a gouache is basically just a watercolor paint that can be reactivated with water in the future. This, even though it's a water-soluble paint, it cannot be reactivated in the future. Once it's down, it's down. It's permanent forever, which is one of the things I like about it. One of the things I don't like about it is if you really need to go in and rework an area, it's not quite as easy to rework. It's not that bad. You just have to work in layers, but it's a little bit different than gouache. Gouache is a little bit more forgiving if you need to rework an area, but with acrylic gouache, you have to really, once the area is down, or once what you've painted is down, that's it. So you have to be a little bit more cognizant about that while you're working. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing at all wrong with traditional watercolor gouache. It's been around for a long time. Artists have been using it for a very, very long time. I'm just experimenting with a new form of it where it gives you a more of a permanent finish to the actual original piece, and I'm liking the results that I'm getting so far. Who knows, I may go back to using traditional gouache at some point. It's all an experiment. Every single piece of art that I work on, I treat as an experiment, and I try to explore different techniques and different materials. So you maybe see me working in acrylic gouache in one painting, and then down the road I might work in a completely different medium for another painting. It just is a matter of what I feel like experimenting with at the time. So, like with every other painting that I've done of a figure study, the first thing I start out with is laying down washes of color, very similar to a watercolor type of painting, where you just lay in light washes of color just to fill in the areas that are later going to be gone over with more layers of color later on. The nice thing about acrylic gouache is that you can actually go back and glaze colors over areas that you've already painted that have already dried, and that can give you a really nice effect. So that's one really nice thing about this paint, is that it will allow you to work in layers of glazes, which can give a really, really nice effect. Now, just backing up a little bit, one of the things I'm also experimenting with this new round of soldier studies that I'm working on is the initial drawing that I'm working on here. Now, what I'll normally do is I'll draw the figure out with a pencil on the piece of paper, and that usually entails a lot of trial and error and erasing and fixing things, and it could get a little bit tedious doing that. So what I've done in this series is I've actually drawn out my figures in Adobe Photoshop on the computer. Actually, on this particular figure, what I started with was a hand drawing, and then what I did was scan it into Adobe Photoshop and cleaned it up, corrected areas that needed to be corrected. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to make corrections and edits on the figure to make sure that I'm drawing a figure accurately, and it allows me to experiment with things like angles. I could take, say for instance, I could take the figure's weapon and put it at different angles to see which will work better, and I could do that very quickly, whereas on a traditional hand drawing, you can't really do that as quickly unless you maybe take some tracing paper and work on, work a drawing over that. It takes a little bit more time on a traditional drawing than it does if you just have it up on a computer. You can kind of just cut and paste things and move them around, and you can also correct proportions really, really easily. So that's why I basically went this route with this particular series. So far it seems to be working out pretty well. And what I do is I'll actually take the drawing and print it out very lightly on the actual Bristol paper. I have an inkjet printer with permanent ink, so I can take the paper and put it through my printer and actually print the drawing very lightly onto the actual paper, and use that as my underdrawing for the painting, which is pretty cool. Modern artists are using modern technology to help them with their art, just like, an artist back 500 years ago probably would have done the same thing. They would have used any kind of technology at their disposal to create their artwork, and it's actually very well documented that artists like Vermeer and other artists have used aids to help them with their paintings, and they've done some incredible work. Not that I'm saying that I'm a Vermeer or anything, but artists will use tools to help them create their art throughout time, and I'm basically no different. Whatever will help me to create a good piece of art, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use that, and hopefully people will enjoy it. One of the other things that the initial drawing out on a computer does, for me at least, is it helps me to proportionally scale the drawing of the figure out onto the paper that I want to work on nicely. So in other words, if I'm going to be drawing on an 11 by 14 piece of paper, what the computer drawing will do is I could take an 11 by 14 area and scale the drawing nicely out in that area, so that I can be sure that the original piece will be centered nicely and will also fill the space nicely on that sheet of paper. One of the other reasons also that I like working with the computer as a computer drawing first is, I've mentioned before in a previous video that I don't like using models that are dressed up in costume and then taking a digital photograph of them. And the reason why I don't like to do that is because I like my figures to look more natural. Now, I understand why it would seem that this philosophy is a little counterintuitive. After all, why wouldn't you as an artist use a photograph or a digital camera to capture the natural look of something like a figure dressed in costume so that you can get the whole look of it correct? Well, folks, that's totally true, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, there is a reason why I don't, and I'll explain it. I feel that when you copy a digital photograph, you run the risk of having your painting look like you copied it from a digital photograph, and I tend to not want to make my figures look that way. I like them to look a little bit more natural and a little bit more like a traditional painting rather than a copy of something that was taken from a modern digital camera. So when you can work on a computer and kind of draw it out by hand, but you're using a Wacom tablet instead of just a pen, and using the tools on a program like Photoshop to help you correct things like the look of the figure, the proportions of the figure, how the lighting may also fall on the figure. You could do a lot with it, and it'll help you to work things out as an artist, to work on these things before you actually start working on the painting. And it's a huge, huge help. It's a very big advantage that modern artists have over traditional artists. And I'm sure had the technology existed back during the time of Rembrandt or Degas or many of these other masters, and they probably would have used it too. So there you go. That's just my humble opinion. And by no means am I saying one method is correct over another. I'm not trying to say that at all. All I'm saying is, for me personally, this is the way I prefer to work right now. and it seems to be working for me now. Down the road in the future, it may change. I may completely change the way I paint, the way I view the figure, and in the past I've actually done the whole dress up the models and photograph them, and there's an advantage to that, no doubt. There's definitely a reason why people do that, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just for me, I found myself relying too much on the photos and not developing my skills as an artist quite as much by using those photos. So I try not to use them as much. I try to look at nature. I try to look at and study how the figure moves, how the clothing on the figure, or on any figure actually, moves. And I try to memorize that so that I can apply it into the artwork that I do and not have a product that looks like something that I took a photograph of rather than, having it be an actual piece of art. The other thing that I've mentioned before in other videos is that modern digital photography has a tendency to lie to you. And what I mean by that is when you take a picture of a figure with a modern camera, many times, and depends on a lot of factors, but usually depending on the lens, depending on the quality of the camera, and a lot of other things, how the model might be standing in space and how they're posed, certain parts of the figure could get distorted. What you need to really be careful of when you're working from a digital photograph is that you do not translate those distortions to your artwork. And that's one of the reasons why I'm also kind of a big proponent of not using or relying so much on digital photography as reference. It's okay for certain things, and there's not, like I said, there's nothing really wrong with it for certain things, but when you copy a digital photograph, you just have to be really careful and mindful of the fact that it could distort proportions and it could make things look kind of weird in the end. So you just gotta have to really just be careful of that, watch for that as you're working. Hopefully this all makes sense, and I hope that I'm able to help anybody who's trying to become an artist understand, just be mindful of certain things. And again, this is just the way I prefer to work. I'm not saying that the way I prefer to work is the right way. It definitely is. It's just my way. So with that, I'm going to let the video play out. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section. I will be more than happy to answer them for you. Alright folks, we reached the end of another video. Thank you so very much for watching. If you would please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. That would help us out immensely. If you're interested in original artwork or prints, you could visit my website at maritato.com. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you.